The rain was coming down hard that Thursday night, making the old windshield wipers on David's pickup truck work overtime. He squinted through the streaky glass, trying to see the road ahead. It had been another long day at the auto shop, and all he wanted was to get home, heat up some leftover pizza, and maybe catch a game on TV. David had been working at Peterson's Auto Repair for 8 years now. At 34, he knew his way around any engine that rolled into the shop. His hands were permanently stained with motor oil, and his back ached from bending over car hoods all day, but he took pride in his work. When someone's car broke down, he was the guy who got them back on the road. The 2-lane highway outside town was darker than usual tonight. The streetlights were few and far between, and the heavy clouds blocked out any moonlight. David kept his speed steady, knowing these winding roads could be tricky even in good weather. He'd driven this route thousands of times, but tonight something felt different. That's when he saw it. At first it looked like a shadow in the distance, but as his headlights swept around the next curve, the scene became clear. A car had crashed into one of the massive oak trees that lined the road. The silver sedan was crumpled like a piece of paper, steam rising from what was left of the hood. The driver's door hung open at a strange angle. David's heart started pounding. He pulled over immediately, his truck's hazard lights cutting through the darkness. As he jumped out, the rain soaked through his work shirt within seconds. He didn't care. Someone might be hurt. He ran toward the wreck, his boots splashing through puddles on the asphalt. The front of the car was completely destroyed. Metal was twisted everywhere, and broken glass sparkled in his truck's headlights. The smell of hot metal and leaking fluids filled the air. "Hello?" he called out. "Is anyone in there?" He moved closer to the open door and saw her. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was slumped over the steering wheel. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her breathing was shallow. She was unconscious but alive. David's hands shook as he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. While he waited for the operator to answer, he looked the woman over carefully. He'd seen enough accidents to know not to move someone who might have neck or back injuries, but he could see she was breathing, which was the most important thing. "What's your emergency?" The operator's voice crackled through his phone. "There's been a car accident on Route 47 about 3 miles east of town," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "A woman is trapped in her car. She's unconscious and bleeding. I need an ambulance right away." The operator asked him several questions about the location and the woman's condition. David answered as best he could while staying close to the car. The woman hadn't moved since he'd arrived, and that worried him. After hanging up, David realized the woman was starting to shiver. The rain was still coming down and the wind was picking up. Her designer dress was getting soaked, and he could see goosebumps on her arms. Without thinking twice, he took off his jacket and carefully draped it over her shoulders. He noticed her jewelry then, diamond earrings that probably cost more than he made in a month. A watch that looked like it belonged in a jewelry store window. Her car, even wrecked as it was, had been expensive. Leather seats, high-end sound system, all the luxury features. This woman came from money, that much was clear. But none of that mattered right now. Rich or poor, she was hurt and needed help. David stayed by the car, talking to her even though she couldn't hear him. "Help is coming," he said softly. "You're going to be okay. Just hang in there." He'd heard somewhere that unconscious people could sometimes still hear voices, and he hoped his words might somehow comfort her. The cut on her forehead was still bleeding, though not as heavily as before. David remembered his first aid training from high school. He pulled out a clean handkerchief from his pocket and gently pressed it against the wound. The bleeding slowed down. In the distance, he could hear sirens getting closer. The sound was the most beautiful thing he'd heard all night. He waved his arms as the ambulance rounded the curve, its flashing lights painting the crash scene in red and blue. 2 paramedics jumped out and quickly took over. David stepped back to give them room to work. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking her vital signs and carefully preparing to move her from the car. "What happened?" one of the paramedics asked David while his partner worked on the woman. "I don't know," David replied. "I was just driving home from work and found her like this. The car was already crashed when I got here. The paramedics nodded and continued their work. They put a neck brace on the woman and carefully moved her onto a stretcher. As they were loading her into the ambulance, something amazing happened. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment. She looked confused and scared, but her gaze found David's face. Her lips moved, and he had to lean in close to hear her. "Thank you," she whispered so quietly he almost missed it. Then her eyes closed again, and the paramedics were rushing her into the ambulance. David watched as they drove away, sirens wailing into the night. A police officer arrived shortly after to take David's statement and investigate the crash. David told him everything he could remember, which wasn't much. He'd simply found the car crashed and helped the woman until the ambulance arrived. The officer looked around the scene with his flashlight. "Looks like she lost control on the curve," he said. "Roads are slick tonight. Happens more often than you'd think." After giving his contact information to the police, David was finally free to go. He walked back to his truck, which was still running with the hazard lights blinking. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but he was soaked through anyway. As he drove the rest of the way home, David couldn't stop thinking about the woman. He hoped she would be okay. He hoped the doctors could help her. He'd done what anyone would do in that situation, but he couldn't shake the image of her scared eyes when she'd thanked him. His small apartment felt especially quiet when he finally got home. He hung his wet clothes in the bathroom and made himself a cup of coffee. The leftover pizza stayed in the fridge. He wasn't hungry anymore. David had always believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. His grandmother had taught him that when he was young. "Character is what you do when nobody's looking," she used to say. Tonight somebody had been looking after all, even if she'd been unconscious for most of it. As he finally settled into bed, David said a small prayer for the woman's recovery. He figured he'd never see her again, but he hoped she'd be okay. That was enough for him. Sometimes being a good person didn't require anything more than being in the right place at the right time and making the right choice. He had no idea that tomorrow would bring the most surprising day of his life. David woke up the next morning to the sound of his alarm clock buzzing at 6:30. His body ached from the tension of the night before, and for a moment he wondered if the whole thing had been a dream. But his jacket was still hanging in the bathroom, damp and stained with blood. It had really happened. He got dressed in his usual work clothes and made a quick breakfast of toast and coffee. The local news was playing on a small TV, but there was no mention of the accident. David wondered how the woman was doing. Was she awake? Were her injuries serious? He thought about calling the hospital, but realized they probably wouldn't tell him anything since he wasn't family. By 7:15, David was walking out to his truck to head to work. That's when he saw it. A massive black SUV was parked right in his driveway. Not just any SUV, but one of those luxury vehicles that cost more than most people made in 2 years. The paint was so perfect it looked like a mirror, and the chrome gleamed even in the overcast morning light. David had never seen anything like it in his neighborhood. He stopped in his tracks, coffee mug still in his hand. Who could possibly be visiting him in a car like that? He lived in a modest duplex on the working-class side of town. His neighbors drove pickup trucks and older sedans, not vehicles that belonged in a movie about rich people. As David stood there staring, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out who looked like he'd walked off the cover of a business magazine. He was probably in his early 60s with silver hair perfectly styled, and a suit that probably cost more than David made in a month. Everything about him screamed money and power. A second door opened and another man got out. This one was younger and built like he spent serious time in the gym. He wore a dark suit too, but he moved differently. His eyes scanned the area like he was looking for trouble. David figured he was some kind of bodyguard or security. The older man walked straight toward David with confidence like he owned the place. His shoes were so polished they reflected the cloudy sky above. "Are you David Chen?" the man asked. His voice was deep and smooth, the kind of voice you'd hear giving a speech at some fancy business dinner. David nodded, still too surprised to speak. How did this man know his name? And why was he here? My name is Robert Harrison, the man said, extending his hand. I believe you helped my daughter last night. It took a moment for the words to sink in. The woman from the accident was this man's daughter? David shook the offered hand, noticing how soft it was compared to his own work-roughened palms. Is she okay? David asked immediately. I've been worried about her all morning. Something shifted in Robert's expression. He seemed surprised by the question. She's stable, he said. The doctors say she has a concussion and some cuts, but nothing life-threatening, thanks to you. David let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. That's good to hear. I'm really glad she's going to be okay. Robert studied David's face for a moment like he was trying to figure something out. The police gave me your information from their report. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did. My daughter owes you her life. I just did what anyone would do, David said, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. I'm just happy I was there to help. Not everyone would have stopped, Robert replied. And not everyone would have stayed with her in the rain until help arrived. You went above and beyond. The bodyguard stayed by the SUV, but David could feel him watching every move. It was strange having someone like that in his quiet neighborhood. A few of his neighbors were starting to peek out their windows, probably wondering what was going on. I'd like to show my appreciation, Robert continued. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. This is just a small token of my gratitude. David looked at the envelope but didn't take it. That's really not necessary, Mr. Harrison. I don't want anything for helping your daughter. Robert's eyebrows went up slightly. Are you sure? You haven't even looked at it. I'm sure, David said firmly. I helped her because she needed help, not because I wanted something in return. For the first time since he'd arrived, Robert looked genuinely puzzled. He stood there holding the envelope, clearly not used to people refusing his money. The silence stretched between them for several seconds. That's very unusual, Robert finally said. Most people would at least want to know what's in the envelope. David shrugged. I'm not most people, I guess. How did you find me anyway? I have resources, Robert said vaguely. When someone saves my daughter's life, I make it my business to learn about them. That made David a little uncomfortable. What kind of resources was this man talking about? And what exactly had he learned? Look, Mr. Harrison, David said. I appreciate you coming here to thank me. That means a lot. But I really don't need anything else. I'm just glad your daughter is okay. Robert put the envelope back in his jacket, but he didn't seem ready to leave. What do you do for work, David? I'm a mechanic. I work at Peterson's auto repair downtown. How long have you been doing that? David wondered where this was going. About 8 years. I like working with my hands, fixing things that are broken. Robert nodded slowly. That's honest work. Respectable. He paused. But surely you have bigger ambitions? Dreams of something more? The question caught David off guard. I'm happy with my life, Mr. Harrison. I have good friends, a roof over my head and work that I enjoy. That's more than a lot of people can say. But don't you want more? A better car? A bigger house? Financial security? David started to feel like he was being interviewed for something. Those things would be nice, but they're not what drives me. I try to focus on being a good person and helping others when I can. Robert stared at him for a long moment. You're quite different from what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who would jump at the chance for a reward. Someone who would see an opportunity and take it. Robert glanced around at David's modest neighborhood. Someone who would want to improve their circumstances. David felt a flash of irritation. There's nothing wrong with my circumstances, Mr. Harrison. Just because I don't have a lot of money doesn't mean I'm not successful. I didn't mean to offend you, Robert said quickly. I'm simply impressed by your character. It's rare to meet someone so genuinely selfless. The way he said it made David feel like he was some kind of exotic animal being studied. Well, I hope your daughter recovers quickly. Will you tell her I asked about her? Actually, Robert said, She's been asking about you. She wants to meet you properly to thank you herself. David wasn't sure how he felt about that. Meeting the woman again might be nice, but something about this whole situation felt off. Why was Robert Harrison really here? And why did David get the feeling that this conversation was about more than just saying thank you? Maybe when she's feeling better, David said diplomatically. Robert smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I think that can be arranged. In fact, I have a feeling we'll be seeing much more of each other, David. Before David could ask what he meant by that, Robert was walking back to his SUV. The bodyguard held the door open for him, and within moments, they were driving away, leaving David standing in his driveway with more questions than answers. As he watched the expensive vehicle disappear around the corner, David couldn't shake the feeling that his simple act of kindness had set something in motion that he didn't fully understand. David couldn't concentrate on work for the rest of the week. Every time he tried to focus on fixing an engine or changing someone's oil, his mind wandered back to Robert Harrison and that expensive black SUV. Something about the whole encounter felt strange, like there was more to the story than just a grateful father saying thank you. On Wednesday afternoon, while David was working under the hood of an old Honda, his boss Tony walked over with a curious expression on his face. "Hey David, there's someone here to see you," Tony said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "Says it's important." David slid out from under the car and looked toward the front office. Through the window, he could see Robert Harrison standing there, in another expensive suit, looking completely out of place among the tire displays and motor oil advertisements. "This can't be good," David muttered to himself as he walked to the office. Robert smiled when he saw David approaching. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by your workplace. I wanted to speak with you about something important." David glanced around, nervously. The other mechanics were pretending to work, but he could tell they were all listening. Tony was openly staring from behind the counter. "What can I do for you, Mr. Harrison?" David asked. "I have a proposition for you. Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" David led him to the small break room in the back of the shop. It wasn't much, just a table, a few chairs, and a coffee machine that hadn't worked right in years. But at least they could talk without an audience. Robert sat down carefully, probably worried about getting his expensive clothes dirty. "David, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. Your character, your values, the way you helped my daughter without expecting anything in return. It's exactly what my company needs right now." "Your company?" David asked, confused. "Harrison Development Group. We're one of the largest real estate companies in the state. We build shopping centers, apartment complexes, office buildings. It's a billion-dollar operation." David had heard of Harrison Development. Their signs were all over town on construction sites and new buildings. He had no idea what this had to do with him. "The thing is," Robert continued, "we're going through some difficult times. There have been some accusations, some negative publicity. People are saying we don't care about the communities where we build our projects." "What kind of accusations?" David asked. Robert waved his hand dismissively. "Nothing serious. Just some disgruntled former tenants making noise about rent increases and property conditions. But in today's world, perception is everything. We need to show people that Harrison Development cares about the community." David was starting to get an uncomfortable feeling about where this conversation was heading. "That's where you come in," Robert said, leaning forward. "I want to offer you a job. Community Relations Director. Your salary would be $120,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a company car." David nearly choked on his coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me correctly. $120,000 a year. That's more than triple what you're making here, I imagine." It was actually more than 4 times what David made at the auto shop, but he wasn't about to admit that. "Mr. Harrison, I don't know anything about community relations or real estate development." "You don't need to. You just need to be yourself. Attend some community meetings, shake some hands, show people that Harrison Development employs good, honest people like you, people who care about helping others." The pieces were starting to fall into place, and David didn't like the picture. They were forming. "You want to hire me because I'm black, don't you?" Robert looked uncomfortable for the first time since David had met him. That's a very direct way of putting it. But it's accurate, isn't it? You think having a black face representing your company will make people forget about whatever you've been accused of doing. David, you're being too cynical. Yes, diversity is important in today's business world, but that's not the only reason I want to hire you. You have integrity. You have character. Those are rare qualities. David stood up from the table. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in being your token employee. Token? Robert's voice sharpened. David, I'm offering you an opportunity that most people would kill for, a chance to change your life, to have real financial security. And all I have to do is pretend that your company cares about people, when it really doesn't. Robert's mask of politeness was starting to slip. You're making assumptions about things you don't understand. Business is complicated, sometimes difficult decisions, Fee to be made. What kind of difficult decisions? Look, David, I didn't come here to debate business ethics with you. I came to offer you a life-changing opportunity. Are you really going to throw it away because of some misguided sense of pride? David felt his anger rising. It's not pride, Mr. Harrison, it's principles. I won't be used to help you cover up whatever your company has been doing to people. Robert stood up as well, his face flushed. You have no idea what you're talking about. Harrison Development provides jobs for thousands of people. We build homes and businesses that improve communities by forcing out the people who are already living there. Where did you hear that? Robert's voice was sharp now, no longer friendly. David realized he'd hit a nerve. It's not hard to figure out. You said there were complaints from former tenants about rent increases. That sounds like you buy up properties in poor neighborhoods, raise the rent so high that people can't afford to stay, then tear everything down and build something expensive. Robert's jaw tightened. You're oversimplifying a very complex process. Am I? Tell me I'm wrong. For a moment, Robert didn't answer. Then he seemed to gather himself, straightening his tie and forcing his expression back to neutral. David, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. I'm offering you a chance to make a real difference, to have a voice in how my company operates. Isn't that better than standing on the sidelines throwing accusations? A voice? Or just a face? To put on your brochures? Robert sighed heavily. Think about it, David. Think about what this money could mean for your family, your future. You could buy a house, a new car, you could have security. I already have security. I have a job I'm good at, friends I trust, and I can sleep at night, knowing I haven't sold out my values for money. Values don't pay the bills, David. Mine do just fine. Robert stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. You're making a mistake. This kind of opportunity doesn't come along twice. Maybe. That's for the best, David replied. Robert walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. My daughter wants to meet you. She's been asking about you every day since the accident. Will you at least agree to visit her in the hospital? David hesitated. Meeting the young woman again was different from taking a job with her father's company. She was the innocent victim in all of this. She had nothing to do with this job offer, Robert added as if reading David's thoughts. She doesn't even know I came here today. Fine, David said finally. I'll visit her, but this conversation about the job is over. Robert nodded. Room 314 at Memorial Hospital. Visiting hours are until 8 tonight. After Robert left, David sat alone in the break room for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. $120,000 was more money than he'd ever dreamed of making. But the price Robert was asking him to pay for it was too high. Tony poked his head into the break room. David arrived at Memorial Hospital that evening feeling nervous. He'd changed out of his work clothes into a clean shirt and jeans, but he still felt out of place walking through the polished hallways past doctors in white coats and visitors, carrying expensive flower arrangements. Room 314 was on the 3rd floor. David knocked gently on the door and heard a soft voice say, "Come in." The young woman was sitting up in bed, looking much better than the last time he'd seen her. The cut on her forehead was covered with a small bandage, and though she looked tired, her eyes were bright and alert. She was probably around 22 or 23, with shoulder-length brown hair and the kind of natural beauty that didn't need makeup. "You must be David," she said, smiling warmly. I'm Claire. I've been hoping you'd come. David stepped into the room, suddenly feeling awkward. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks to you. Claire gestured to the chair next to her bed. Please sit down, I owe you a proper thank you. David sat down, noticing that despite being in a hospital gown, Claire still managed to look elegant. Her mannerisms, the way she spoke, everything about her showed she'd grown up with money and education. You don't owe me anything, David said. I'm just glad you're okay. The doctor said if you hadn't found me when you did, things could have been much worse. You saved my life, David. I just did what anyone would do. Claire shook her head. No, not anyone. Most people would have driven right past. You stopped, you stayed with me in the rain, you made sure I was okay. That takes a special kind of person. David felt uncomfortable with the praise. Your father came to see me. He told me you wanted to meet me. Something changed in Claire's expression when he mentioned her father. The warmth remained, but there was something else now, something that looked almost like guilt. Did he offer you a job? She asked quietly. David was surprised by the question. How did you know? Claire looked down at her hands. Because that's what he does. Whenever there's a problem, he throws money at it until it goes away. You don't sound like you approve. I don't. Claire looked back up at him. David, there are things about my father's business that I'm not proud of, things I've been trying to understand and change. What kind of things? Claire was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to tell him. Have you ever heard of Pine Street? David nodded. It's over on the east side of town. Used to be a nice neighborhood, lots of families, but most of the houses are empty now. My father's company bought most of those houses. The families who lived there couldn't afford the rent increases, so they had to move. Now he's planning to tear everything down and build expensive condos. That doesn't sound legal. It is legal, Claire said bitterly, but that doesn't make it right. Those families had been living there for generations. Some of them owned their houses outright, but the property taxes kept going up after my father started developing the area. They couldn't afford to stay. David felt his anger rising. So he forced them out? Not directly. But when you buy up all the houses around someone's home and let them fall apart, when you make sure the neighborhood gets labeled as blighted, so property taxes increase, when you make life difficult enough, people eventually give up and sell. And your father gets their property for cheap. Exactly. Claire's voice was heavy with shame. I found out about it by accident. I was looking through some company files for a college project about urban development. I couldn't believe what I was reading. What did you do? I confronted him. We had a huge fight. That's actually why I was driving so recklessly the night you found me. I just had another argument with him about Pine Street. David was beginning to understand why Robert Harrison had been so eager to hire him. He needs someone like me to make his company look good. He thinks if he hires someone the community respects, someone with integrity, it will help his image. But David, you can't let him use you like that. I already told him no. Claire looked relieved. Good. I was hoping you would. But I have to warn you, my father doesn't give up easily. He'll probably try again. Let him try. I'm not interested. Claire studied his face. You really mean that, don't you? Even though it was a lot of money? Money isn't everything, Claire. I've seen what happens when people put money before principles. It never ends well. I wish more people thought like you do. Claire paused, then seemed to make a decision. David, can I trust you with something? Of course. I've been secretly documenting everything my father's company has been doing. All the families they've displaced, all the properties they've acquired through questionable means. I want to do something about it, but I don't know how. What do you mean, do something? Help those families. Find a way to make this right. My father set up a trust fund for me when I was born. It's worth several $1 million, and I get control of it when I turn 25, which is next month. David's eyes widened. Several $1 million was more money than he could even imagine. I want to use that money to help the people my father's business has hurt, Claire continued. But I need someone I can trust to help me figure out how to do it right. Someone who understands what it's like to struggle, who knows these communities. Claire, that's very generous, but your father would never allow it. He can't stop me. The trust fund is mine, and the lawyers who set it up made sure. My father can't interfere with how I use it once I have control, but you'd be going against your own family. Claire's jaw tightened with determination. My family got rich by hurting other families. That's not something I can live with. David was amazed by her courage. Here was a young woman who could have lived a life of luxury without ever thinking about the people her family's wealth had displaced. Instead, she was willing to risk everything to make things right. Why are you telling me this? David asked. Because I need someone to help me, someone I can trust, someone who understands right from wrong. Claire leaned forward. David, you could take that job my father offered you, but not for the reasons he wants. You could work from the inside, help me gather more evidence, help me figure out the best way to help these families. That sounds dangerous. What if your father finds out? Then I'll deal with him. David, I can't do this alone. I need someone who knows how to connect with people, someone the community would trust. David was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The idea was risky, maybe even dangerous. Robert Harrison didn't seem like the kind of man who would take betrayal lightly. But those families on Pine Street deserved justice, and Claire was offering him a chance to actually make a difference, not just in his own life, but in the lives of people who really needed help. If I agreed to help you, David said, slowly, we'd have to be very careful. Your father is smart and powerful. One mistake could ruin everything. Claire smiled for the first time since they'd started talking about her father. Does that mean you'll do it? David looked at this brave young woman who was willing to give up her inheritance to help people she'd never met. How could he say no? Yeah, he said finally. I'll help you, but we do this my way, carefully and safely. Thank you, David. You have no idea what this means to me. As David left the hospital that night, he realized his life was about to become much more complicated. But for the first time since this whole thing started, he felt like he was doing something that really mattered. Everything okay in here? That guy looked pretty upset when he left. Yeah, David said, standing up and heading back to work. Everything's fine. Some opportunities just aren't worth taking. But as he went back to working on the Honda, David couldn't stop thinking about Robert's daughter. What was she like? Did she know what kind of business her father really ran? And why did she want to meet him so badly? There was only one way to find out. 3 weeks later, David found himself sitting in a leather chair in Robert Harrison's corner office wearing a suit that felt completely foreign on his body. The view from the 40th floor was incredible, but David couldn't enjoy it. He was too focused on the folder hidden in his briefcase, filled with documents that could destroy the man sitting across from him. So, David, how are you settling into your new role? Robert asked, leaning back in his expensive chair. It's been educational, David replied carefully. After much discussion with Claire, they had decided that David should take the job after all. It was the only way to get inside the company and gather the evidence they needed. For 3 weeks, David had been attending meetings, visiting construction sites, and slowly building a case against Harrison Development. What he'd discovered was worse than either he or Claire had imagined. I've been reviewing some of the company's recent projects, David said, opening his briefcase. The Pine Street development, the Riverside Apartments, the Oakwood Shopping Center. I have some concerns. Robert's expression didn't change, but David noticed his hands tighten slightly on his desk. What kind of concerns? The families who used to live in these areas. What happened to them after they were forced to sell their homes? Forced is a strong word, David. These were all voluntary sales. David pulled out a thick folder and placed it on Robert's desk. Mrs. Johnson lived on Pine Street for 40 years. She owned her house outright, but after you started buying up the neighborhood, her property taxes tripled. She couldn't afford to pay them anymore. Property values increase when an area is being developed. That's economics. Mr. Rodriguez had a small grocery store on Riverside Avenue for 20 years. After you bought the building next to his, the rent on his store went up by 300%. He had to close down. Robert stood up and walked to the window, his back to David. David, you're new to this business. You don't understand how development works. I understand enough. David opened the folder and spread papers across the desk. I have documents showing that Harrison Development deliberately drives up costs in targeted neighborhoods to force people out. I have records of bribes paid to city inspectors to declare properties unsafe. I have proof that you've been lying to the city council about your intentions for these developments. Robert turned around slowly, his face pale. Where did you get those documents? Does it matter? The point is, I have them, and I'm prepared to take them to the authorities unless you agree to make things right. You're threatening me? Robert's voice was quiet, but there was danger in it. I'm offering you a chance to do the right thing before this gets ugly. Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. David, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I've been building this company for 30 years. I'm not going to let some mechanic with a hero complex destroy everything I've worked for. This isn't about destroying anything. It's about justice for the families you've hurt. Justice? Robert's voice rose. Let me tell you about justice. David, I grew up poor. My father worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I built this company from nothing, creating jobs for thousands of people. I've contributed millions to charity. I've improved this city by destroying poor neighborhoods and displacing families, by creating opportunities. Those rundown areas are now thriving business districts. Property values have increased across the entire city because of my work. David stood up, facing Robert across the desk. And where are the people who used to live there supposed to go? Mrs. Johnson is now living with her daughter in a 1-bedroom apartment because she lost her home. Mr. Rodriguez is working as a janitor because he lost his business. Their lives matter too. This is business, David. Sometimes people get hurt. That's the price of progress. No, that's the price of greed. Robert's face flushed red with anger. How dare you lecture me about greed? You think you're so noble, so pure. But you took my money, didn't you? You accepted this job, drove the company car, lived off my generosity. I took the job to stop you. And where is your precious integrity now? You lied to me. You stole from me. You betrayed my trust. What makes you any better than the people you're condemning? David felt the weight of Robert's words, but he pushed forward. Because I'm trying to help people, not hurt them. Help people? Robert laughed bitterly. You want to help people? Fine. Here's my counteroffer. I'll give you $5 million. Cash. You can help anyone you want with that money. All you have to do is give me those documents and walk away. David stared at him. $5 million could change his life forever. He could help dozens of families, maybe hundreds, but it wouldn't stop Robert from hurting more people in the future. No deal, David said. 10 million. No. Robert's mask of control finally slipped completely. You fool. Do you think this is some kind of movie where the good guy always wins? I have lawyers who will destroy you. I have connections in City Hall, in the police department, in the state capitol. I can make your life very difficult, David. Maybe, but I'm not backing down. The office door opened suddenly and Claire walked in. She was dressed in a business suit, looking every inch the wealthy heiress she was, but her face was set with determination. Hello, Father, she said calmly. Robert stared at his daughter in shock. Claire, what are you doing here? Supporting David. She walked over and stood next to him. He's not alone in this. You? Robert's voice was barely a whisper. You're behind this? We're behind this together. David has been working with me to document what your company has been doing. All those families you've displaced, all the communities you've destroyed. We have evidence of everything. Robert sank into his chair, looking suddenly older. My own daughter. You taught me to stand up for what's right, Father. You just forgot to do it yourself. Claire, you don't understand. This company is your inheritance. Everything I've built will be yours someday. You're destroying your own future. I'd rather have no future than one built on other people's suffering. David watched the exchange between father and daughter, feeling sorry for both of them despite everything. Family relationships were complicated, and he could see the pain in both their faces. Here's what's going to happen, Claire continued. You're going to establish a $50 million fund to compensate every family that has been displaced by your developments. You're going to provide affordable housing for anyone who wants to return to their neighborhoods. And you're going to change how this company operates going forward. And if I refuse? David picked up his briefcase. Then we take everything we have to the district attorney, the FBI, and every news outlet in the state. Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city he'd helped shape. $50 million will bankrupt some of our projects. Then maybe those projects shouldn't exist, Claire said softly. Finally, Robert nodded. Fine, you win. I'll establish the fund. 6 months later, David was back at Peterson's Auto Repair, but now he only worked there part-time. The rest of his time was spent running the Harrison Family Foundation, which Claire had established to help families affected by unfair development practices. Robert had kept his word, though he barely spoke to his daughter anymore. David often thought about that rainy night when he'd found Claire crashed by the side of the road. He'd thought he was just helping one person, but it had led to helping hundreds. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness really could change the world, and sometimes David realized the people who need rescuing aren't always the ones lying injured by the roadside. Sometimes they're the ones who have lost their way in life and need someone to show them the path back to doing what's right. Hans chest at the mention of Mrs. Wilson. She had passed away 3 years ago, peacefully in her sleep after a long battle with her diabetes. But not before seeing Deshawn graduate high school with honors and accept a full scholarship to the architecture program at the University of Illinois. I wish she could be here, Deshawn said quietly. In a way, she is, Thomas replied. Her foundation is making all this possible. After Mrs. Wilson's death, Deshawn had been shocked to learn that she had left her entire estate, including her life insurance and savings, to establish a foundation for underprivileged students interested in architecture and design. Deshawn had been named as one of the foundation's board members, alongside Thomas, and today the Eleanor Wilson Foundation was officially opening its first permanent location, a design studio and education center attached to the community center where Deshawn had gotten his start. They arrived at the community center's outdoor plaza, where rows of chairs had been set up facing a small stage. A banner hung across the front. Eleanor Wilson Design Academy, Building Futures. People were already gathering. Community members, local officials, students from nearby schools who would benefit from the new academy's programs. Deshawn recognized many faces, including kids who had grown up using the reading room he had designed years ago. Deshawn, called a deep voice. Deshawn turned to see Mr. Parker, his old high school math teacher, approaching with a group of teenagers trailing behind him. My students are excited to meet you. They've been studying your community center design in our architecture elective. One of the teenagers stepped forward, a girl with bright eyes and a sketchbook clutched to her chest. Is it true you designed the reading room when you were just a kid? Deshawn nodded. I was 14. Not much older than you. That's what I told them, Mr. Parker said, beaming, that someone from their own neighborhood designed this beautiful building. As Mr. Parker led his students away to find seats, Deshawn felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Grandma May standing behind him, dressed in her finest church clothes, a proud smile on her face. Look at you, she said, straightening his tie, all grown up and changing the world. Deshawn hugged her gently. At 82, Grandma May had slowed down considerably, but her mind was still sharp as ever. She lived with Deshawn now in the small but comfortable apartment he'd rented near his university campus. No more worrying about overdue bills or rising rent. The scholarship covered his tuition, and his part-time job at Thomas's firm paid enough for their living expenses. I'm not changing the world, Grandma, Deshawn said, just trying to make our little piece of it a bit better. Isn't that how the world changes? One little piece at a time. She patted his cheek. Now go on. They're waiting for you. Thomas was at the podium, welcoming everyone and explaining the purpose of the new design academy. Deshawn made his way to the side of the stage where he would wait until called to speak. As he stood there, he caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Tyrell. Their paths had diverged sharply after that summer day when Tyrell had flashed his wad of cash. While Deshawn had doubled down on his studies and apprenticeship, Tyrell had continued down his own path. There had been arrests, a stint in juvenile detention, and rumors of more serious trouble. But last Deshawn had heard, Tyrell had finally gotten clean and was working at an auto repair shop. Tyrell met Deshawn's gaze and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not quite a smile, but not hostile either. More like respect between two men who had chosen different roads. And now, Thomas was saying, I'd like to introduce someone very special. 8 years ago, he was a boy who broke down a door to save a woman's life. Today, he's a promising young architect whose designs are already changing this community. Please welcome Deshawn Williams, the first recipient of the Eleanor Wilson Foundation Scholarship and now a board member of the foundation. The applause washed over Deshawn as he approached the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all connected by this place and this moment. He felt a strange blend of nervousness and calm. Thank you all for coming today, he began. I'm not much of a public speaker, so I'll keep this short. He took a deep breath. When I was 13, I heard someone crying for help and I broke down a door. I didn't think about it. I just knew someone needed help and I was the only one there to give it. Deshawn glanced toward the sky, thinking of Mrs. Wilson. What I didn't know was that by helping her, I was really opening a door for myself. Mrs. Eleanor Wilson could have just thanked me and gone on with her life. Instead, she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. She opened doors that I didn't even know existed. He gestured to the building behind him. That's what this academy is all about. It's not just teaching kids how to draw buildings. It's about showing them doors they might not see on their own. It's about giving them the tools to open those doors. Or if necessary, he smiled, to break them down. The crowd chuckled, and Deshawn felt himself relaxing. Mrs. Wilson used to tell me that architecture isn't just about buildings, it's about the spaces where life happens. She taught me that a good design considers not just how a building looks, but how it makes people feel when they're inside it. Does it lift them up? Does it make them feel safe? Does it inspire them to dream bigger? Deshawn paused, looking at the young faces in the crowd. My hope for this academy is that it becomes a place where young people from this neighborhood can come to dream bigger, where they can learn that their ideas matter, that their vision for their community matters. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, the brass doorknob from Mrs. Wilson's old apartment. The building had been renovated last year, and the property manager had saved it for him, knowing its significance. This doorknob is from the door I broke down 8 years ago. I keep it to remind me that sometimes the most important moments in our lives don't announce themselves. They just happen, and it's up to us to recognize them and walk through. Deshawn held up the doorknob, catching the sunlight. The Eleanor Wilson Design Academy is now officially open. Let's see what doors we can open together. The applause was thunderous. As Deshawn stepped away from the podium, he saw Grandma May wiping tears from her eyes. Thomas gave him a thumbs up. Even Tyrell was clapping, a thoughtful expression on his face. After the ceremony, as people toured the new facility, Deshawn found himself standing in the main studio space. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in abundant natural light, illuminating drafting tables and computer stations where young people would soon be working on their own designs. On the wall hung a large portrait of Mrs. Wilson, her blue eyes kind but penetrating just as he remembered them. Beside it was a plaque with words she had often said to him. Talent without opportunity is like having wings but nowhere to fly. Deshawn thought about the boy he had been. Skinny, quiet, drawing buildings in the back of his notebook, never imagining he could actually design real ones. He thought about the woman who had seen potential in him when few others did. And he thought about all the young people who would come through these doors, carrying dreams of their own. The Eleanor Wilson Design Academy wouldn't change the world overnight. But it might change one young person's life, and that young person might change another life and another, rippling outward in ways no one could predict. Just like what had happened when a 13-year-old boy heard a cry for help and broke down a door.